Ambassador Kelth stood before the Galactic Council with trembling hands. The datapad she held contained images that had stolen her sleep for 3 nights. Images of her home colony. Images of what the humans were doing there. "Honored members," she began, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. "The Zenith Collective has deployed military vessels to Vrilia Prime. They are removing our people from ancestral lands to access mineral deposits beneath our cities." The council chamber buzzed with polite disinterest. Council member Throven, a massive creature with 4 eyes, waved one appendage dismissively. "Ambassador Kelth, humans are known throughout the galaxy as passionate beings. Emotional, yes, but reasonable. Have you attempted negotiation?" Kelth's jaw tightened. "They gave us 72 hours to evacuate. That deadline expires tomorrow." "Then you should evacuate," Throven said simply. "The collective purchased those mining rights legally from a human colonial governor. Galactic law is clear on property rights." The other council members nodded. Some returned to their personal displays, already bored with the discussion. Kelth felt her hope crumbling like sand. "With respect, council member, we have lived on Vrilia Prime for 6 generations. Our children were born in those cities. Where would you have us go?" "That is unfortunate," Throven replied, his tone suggesting it was anything but his concern. "But the council cannot interfere with legal commerce. File a complaint with the human government. This session is adjourned." Kelth's shuttle raced back toward Vrilia Prime, but she already knew she was too late. As her ship dropped from faster-than-light travel, she saw them. Human warships in orbit. Dozens of them, arranged in perfect geometric patterns around her world. Their hulls were painted corporate white and blue, decorated with the Zenith Collective's logo, like a brand on livestock. Her communications officer looked up from his console, face pale. "Ambassador, they are broadcasting a final warning. All Vrians have 30 minutes to reach designated evacuation zones." 30 minutes? Kelth's voice cracked. "They said 72 hours. There are still children in the deep shelters who cannot reach the surface in time." The officer's hand shook as he worked his controls. "They say circumstances changed. They say armed resistance was detected. All previous agreements are void." Kelth knew this was a lie. The only weapons on Vrilia Prime were hunting tools and ceremonial blades. But she also knew that human corporations did not need truth. They needed excuses, and excuses were easy to manufacture. Down on the planet's surface, Torvin pressed his back against the cold wall of an underground tunnel. He was a teacher, not a soldier, but when the humans came, everyone had to choose. Fight or flee. He had chosen to fight, though his weapon was only an old mining laser meant for cutting rock. 3 other Vrians huddled with him in the darkness. One was a child, barely 12 cycles old, separated from her family when the evacuation orders came. Torvin had promised to keep her safe. Now he wondered if that promise would die with them both. "Do you hear that?" whispered Gemma, a farmer who had taken up arms when the humans destroyed her fields to make room for their landing platforms. She pointed upward. A low hum vibrated through the stone, growing louder, growing closer. Then the ceiling exploded inward. Torvin threw himself over the child as debris rained down. When the dust cleared, a human soldier stood in the breach, weapon raised. His armor was spotless, his helmet reflecting Torvin's terrified face. Behind him, 2 more humans dropped through the opening with mechanical precision. "Target acquired," the lead soldier said into his helmet communicator. His voice was calm, almost bored. 4 hostiles. Initiating containment protocol. "We are not hostiles," Torvin shouted, raising his hands. "We are civilians. This child is only 12 cycles old." The soldier's helmet turned toward him. For a moment, there was silence. Then the soldier reached up and removed his helmet, revealing a young human face. Dark eyes, short black hair, and an expression that made Torvin's blood run cold. Not because it showed cruelty, because it showed nothing at all. "I am Specialist Marcus Chen," the human said. "You are classified as insurgents under Zenith Collective Security Protocol 47. You occupied a restricted zone after evacuation orders were issued. This constitutes hostile action." "We were trying to evacuate," Torvin said desperately. "The child was lost. We were bringing her to the surface." Chung glanced at a display on his wrist. "Our sensors detected an energy weapon signature from this location. Mining laser, civilian grade, modified for combat use. Hostile intent confirmed." He gestured to the old laser torch still clutched in Torvin's hand, the tool he had carried for 20 years in the deep mines. "Please," Torvin begged. "Be reasonable. We only wanted to defend our homes." Something flickered across Chun's face. Not quite emotion, but perhaps the memory of emotion. He lowered his weapon slightly. "Step forward, slowly. Leave the weapon." Torvin did as instructed, moving carefully. The other Vrians followed, the child clinging to Gemma's hand. They were halfway to the breach when Chun's communicator crackled. "All units, new orders from command. Pacification costs exceed projections. Authorization granted for Terminal Solution Protocol. Eliminate all targets in restricted zones. No prisoners." Chun's expression did not change. He simply raised his weapon again. His two companions did the same, their movements synchronized like machines. "Wait," Torvin said, his voice breaking. "You are human. Humans are supposed to be the passionate species, the ones who feel too much, who care too deeply. I have read your literature, watched your films. You celebrate compassion. You make heroes of those who protect the innocent. That is entertainment," Chun replied flatly. "This is business. I have student debt of 140,000 credits. Zenith Collective pays well. They offer dental coverage and matching retirement contributions. If I refuse orders, I lose my employment rating and get blacklisted from 70% of corporate hiring pools." "So you would kill us for money?" Torvin could barely speak the words. Chun paused, as if genuinely considering the question. "I do not think about it that way. You are a problem. I solve problems. That is my function. Tomorrow I will solve different problems. The day after, others still. I do not carry the weight of any of them. I learned not to, back in training." He aimed carefully at Torvin's chest. "It is not personal. I do not hate you. I do not feel anything about you at all. That makes it easier. For both of us." Above them, the ships in orbit adjusted their positions. Kelth watched from her shuttle as targeting lasers painted her world in geometric patterns. Coordinates locked. Systems armed. In the command centers of those ships, humans sat at consoles, monitoring readouts, sipping coffee, chatting about weekend plans. When the order came, they would press buttons that would end millions of lives. Then they would clock out and go home. The bombardment began right on schedule. Perfectly executed. Not a single shot wasted. The humans below, like Marcus Chun, did their jobs with mechanical efficiency. They did not celebrate. They did not mourn. They simply completed their tasks and filed their reports. Kelf's last view of Relia Prime was through tear-blurred eyes as her pilot jumped the shuttle into faster-than-light travel. Behind them, her world burned. Not because the humans who destroyed it were evil, but because they had learned to do terrible things without feeling evil at all. That, she realized, was the true terror. Not monsters, just ordinary people who had perfected the art of not caring. Kelf's shuttle touched down on Earth 3 days after Relia Prime fell silent. She had brought 12 refugees with her, all that remained of the 3,000 who had tried to evacuate. The others were ash now, scattered across a world that no longer existed in any meaningful way. The human immigration officer who processed them was polite. He offered them water and showed genuine sympathy when he heard their story. He even apologized, though Kelth noticed he said, "I'm sorry that happened," rather than "I'm sorry we did that," as if the destruction had been a natural disaster rather than a choice made by his species. "I need to speak with your government," Kelth told him. "Someone with authority to stop the Zenith Collective." The officer smiled sadly. "Ma'am, it doesn't really work that way. But I'll make some calls." Those calls led to other calls, which led to appointments, which led to meetings with officials who listened politely and did nothing. The first was a junior diplomat who took careful notes and promised to escalate the matter. The second was a senior official who expressed deep concern and explained that the collective operated in a legal gray area. The third was a politician who called the situation troubling and regrettable before pivoting to discuss an upcoming election. "But they murdered millions of my people," Kelth said, struggling to keep her voice level. "Surely your government has laws against genocide." The politician, a woman named Senator Harrison, folded her hands on her desk. "Ambassador Kelth, I want to help you. I truly do. But the collective purchased those mining rights through legal channels. They claim your people fired on their personnel first. Whether that's true or not, they had contracted security forces approved by the colonial governor. Legally speaking, they were within their rights to respond to threats. We had no weapons that could threaten their warships," Kelth said. "Mining lasers against orbital bombardment. Does that sound like a military threat to you?" Harrison's expression showed genuine discomfort. "Look, off the record? You're right. What happened was wrong. But Zenith Collective employs 40,000 humans across 12 systems. They contribute heavily to campaigns on both sides of our political divide. If I push too hard, I lose corporate support. I lose my seat. Then someone who cares even less takes my place." She leaned forward. "I'm not saying this is right. I'm saying this is how the system works." Kelth left that meeting with her hands shaking. She found herself walking through Earth cities, trying to understand these humans who could be so kind individually and so monstrous collectively. She saw parents playing with children in parks. She saw strangers helping elderly people cross streets. She saw people crying at sad movies and cheering at sporting events. Everywhere she looked, she saw evidence that humans could feel deeply. But she also saw billboards advertising Zenith Collective's latest stock performance. Saw news broadcasts that mentioned Vrelia Prime for 30 seconds before moving to celebrity gossip. Saw people scrolling past images of her burning world without pausing, their thumbs flicking upward in an endless search for more entertaining content. One evening, she found herself in a public library, accessing the collective's financial records. They were public, proudly displayed for anyone to see. Shareholders could log in and watch their investments grow in real time. She navigated to the recent quarterly report and felt her stomach turn. The Vrelia Prime operation was listed as a successful pacification action that had removed logistical obstacles and accelerated mineral extraction timeline by 18 months. The projected profit increase was 3.7%. Shareholders had voted to approve the operation by an overwhelming majority. Kelth dug deeper, finding the names behind the votes. Not corporate executives in dark rooms, but ordinary people. A retired teacher in Ohio who owned 200 shares. A doctor in Singapore with 500. A young programmer in Buenos Aires with 50. Thousands of regular humans who had chosen profit over lives and probably never thought about the choice at all. She found one shareholder's comment on an investment forum. "Zenith is killing it this quarter." up 12% since the Vreelia situation got resolved. Thinking of buying more before next earnings report. Resolved. They called genocide resolved like it was a software bug. Kelf contacted human activist groups next. She met with people who genuinely cared, who organized protests and wrote passionate articles. They held vigils for Vreelia Prime. They chanted slogans outside Zenith facilities. 20 people showed up to the first protest, 15 to the second, 8 to the third. By the fourth week, the protests had stopped entirely. People have short attention spans, one activist explained apologetically. We need a new angle to keep them engaged. Maybe personal stories? Did any of your refugees learn to speak English? A child survivor would really resonate with audiences. Cal stared at her. You want me to parade traumatized children in front of cameras for entertainment value? Not entertainment, the activist said quickly. Awareness. That's how we reach people here. Through emotional narratives they can connect with. But Kelf had learned that even emotional narratives had a shelf life on Earth. She watched as journalists covered the story for a day, then moved on. The Vreelia Prime hashtag trended for 6 hours before being replaced by something about a celebrity's new hairstyle. The galaxy's most passionate species had weaponized their empathy, turning it into content to be consumed and forgotten. The turning point came when she met Sarah Okonkwo. The message arrived encrypted from an anonymous source. It contained a single line. I helped build the machine. I want to help break it. They met in a crowded coffee shop where surveillance would blend in the background noise. Sarah was in her 40s, well-dressed, with tired eyes that had seen too much. She ordered tea she did not drink and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. I was Zenith's Director of Operational Efficiency for 3 years, Sarah began. I designed the algorithm that approved the Vreelia Prime action. Kelf's hand moved toward the knife she kept hidden. Sarah noticed and did not flinch. I deserve whatever you want to do to me, Sarah said. But hear me out first. The algorithm did not decide to kill your people. Humans did. We just built a system that let us pretend we didn't. She pulled out a tablet and showed Kelf spreadsheets, flowcharts, decision trees. Look at this. Every step seems reasonable in isolation. Someone determined that Vreelia Prime had valuable minerals. Someone else calculated extraction costs. A third person assessed security risks. A fourth analyzed legal vulnerabilities. Each decision was reviewed and approved by different people who never had to think about the complete picture. The bombardment order, Sarah continued, tapping the screen, was approved by a committee of 7 executives. None of them saw images of your cities. They saw cost-benefit analyses. They saw projected timelines. They saw shareholder value. When they voted yes, they were voting for numbers, not death. But they knew, Kelf said. They had to know what those numbers meant. They knew and they didn't know, Sarah replied. That's the genius of it. The system is designed to create distance between action and consequence. The executives never pulled a trigger. The soldiers who pulled triggers never made the decision to attack. The programmers who wrote the attack algorithms never chose the targets. The shareholders who profited never saw the bodies. Everyone involved was just doing their job, following procedures, optimizing efficiency. Sarah closed the tablet. I quit 6 months ago when I finally added up what all my optimization had optimized for. But Zenith isn't unique. There are dozens of corporations operating the same way. They've perfected something terrifying. They've industrialized the ability to do evil while feeling innocent. Why are you telling me this? Kelf asked. Because I found others like me. Humans who worked inside these machines and couldn't live with what they built. We've been quietly documenting everything. Internal communications. Financial records. The real decision-making processes. We have evidence that could expose the machinery, Show people what they're actually part of. She met Kelth's eyes. But we need someone from outside to sound the alarm. Someone who has lost everything and has nothing left to lose. Someone the galaxy will listen to. Kelth thought of her world, her people, her civilization reduced to line items in a quarterly report. She thought of Marcus Chun, the soldier who felt nothing. She thought of the shareholders celebrating their profits. She thought of the activists who got bored. She thought of the politicians who made sympathetic noises and did nothing. What do you need me to do? She asked. Sarah smiled for the first time. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone preparing to burn down the machine they had helped build. We're going to make it impossible for them to look away. She said. The hack took 3 days to prepare and 6 minutes to execute. At exactly midnight Greenwich Mean Time, every screen on Earth simultaneously switched to the same broadcast. Phones, computers, billboards, even the displays in corporate offices. For 48 hours, no amount of turning devices off or changing channels could stop it. The footage Sarah's group had compiled was devastating. Not because it showed graphic violence, though it showed plenty, but because it showed the banality behind the violence. Executive meetings where genocide was discussed like a logistics problem. Emails joking about pest control on Virilia Prime. Voice recordings of soldiers casually coordinating bombardment strikes while discussing dinner plans. In faces. Kelth had insisted on that. Every executive, every soldier, every middle manager who had signed off on the operation. Their names, their faces, their home addresses. Let them be seen, she had argued. Let them live with being visible. The response was immediate and explosive. Social media erupted with outrage. The hashtag #RememberVirilia spread like wildfire. Protests formed within hours in every major city. People who had scrolled past news articles about distant aliens suddenly cared deeply when confronted with footage they could not escape. For 3 glorious days, Kelth allowed herself to hope. Then the machine began to adapt. The first counterattack came from Zenith's public relations firm. They released their own footage showing Vrian resistance fighters with weapons, claiming the broadcasts were propaganda. They emphasized the human jobs that Zenith provided, the families who depended on those paychecks. They found sympathetic employees to give tearful interviews about how they were being persecuted for simply trying to support their children. The second wave was subtler. The algorithm shifted. New content began flooding social media. A celebrity couple announced their divorce. A new entertainment franchise released a trailer. A political scandal broke. The feeds that had been full of Virilia Prime footage gradually filled with other things. Not all at once. Just slowly, steadily, inevitably. By the end of the second week, the protests had shrunk. By the third week, Remember Virilia was trending less than a new dance challenge. A month later, Kelth found herself watching a late-night comedy show make jokes about the whole incident. The host smirked and said something about alien drama before moving on to mock a politician's haircut. She sat alone in her small apartment, surrounded by the 12 refugees who were all that remained of her people, and felt despair crush her chest. They had shown humanity the truth, and humanity had looked at it for a moment before looking away. But Sarah had not given up. She arrived at Kelth's apartment with 3 other humans, all former corporate insiders who carried the same tired, guilty eyes. One was a former Zenith engineer named David. Another was an ex-military contractor called Martinez. The third was a young woman named Priya who had worked in financial compliance. It didn't work the way we hoped, Sarah admitted, settling into a chair. But it did work. We got people's attention, even if they looked away again. Now we try something different. What's left to try? Kelth asked bitterly. You showed them everything. They saw and they chose not to care. We showed them victims, Sarah said. But victims are easy to ignore. They make people feel uncomfortable, guilty. That's why the attention faded. We need to show them something else. We need to show them profit. David pulled out a laptop and turned it toward Kelth. We tracked every credit that flowed through the Vrelia operation. Every payment, every bonus, every dividend. We can show exactly how much money every person involved made from your people's deaths. Senator Harrison, he tapped a line on the screen, received 50,000 credits in campaign contributions from Zenith executives. This retirement fund manager got a bonus of 200,000 for recommending Zenith stock to clients. This shareholder made 87 credits from the Vrelia operation. This one made 3,000. This one made 12. People can ignore distant suffering, Martinez added. But they can't ignore being shown exactly what they personally gained from that suffering. We make it individual. We make it personal. We make every single person see their own hands. Priya leaned forward. And we don't just target the big players. We target everyone. The shareholders, the supply chain, the banks that financed the operation, the insurance companies that covered it. Everyone who touched this and made money from it. We create a database that anyone can search. Type in a company name, a person's name, and see exactly how they profited from genocide. We destroy plausible deniability, Sarah said. Right now, people can tell themselves they didn't know. They weren't involved. We make that impossible. We create a permanent record that follows every person and every corporation that participated. Kelf looked at the data scrolling across the screen. Millions of transactions. Thousands of names. A web of complicity so vast it was almost beautiful in its complexity. You think public shame will work where moral appeals failed? No, Sarah said bluntly. But we think economic consequences will. The general public might not care, but corporations care about their reputations. Insurance companies care about liability. Banks care about regulatory scrutiny. We create a situation where being associated with Zenith becomes economically dangerous. Over the next 3 weeks, they worked 18-hour days. They built a database, cross-referenced financial records, and verified every piece of data. The night before launch, Kel sat on her apartment balcony, looking up at Earth's stars, wondering if her people would have been safer if they had never been discovered by humans at all. Sarah joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. She offered one to Kelth, who took it despite having no taste for the bitter drink. Do you hate us? Sarah asked quietly. All of us? Every human? Kelth considered the question. I hate what you've built. Your corporations, your systems, your casual cruelty. But you personally? You're trying to fix it. David gave up a career. Martinez lost military benefits. Priya is facing legal charges. You're all sacrificing for people you never met and don't even belong to your species. So you see the contradiction, Sarah said. We're capable of such compassion and such indifference. Sometimes in the same person. The soldier Marcus Chun, Kelf said. The one who killed Torvin and the others. I've thought about him constantly. He was not a monster. He was just a person doing his job. That's what terrifies me. You've learned to separate yourselves from your actions so completely that good people can do evil things and sleep peacefully. Sarah nodded slowly. We've industrialized moral distance. Created systems that let us profit from suffering while maintaining clean hands and clear consciences. It's the ultimate expression of human ingenuity applied to the wrong problem. Can it be fixed? Kelth asked. I don't know, Sarah admitted. But we have to try. Because right now, Zenith is preparing to expand operations to 12 more worlds. And if we don't break the machine now, a dozen more civilizations will burn. They launched the database at dawn. Within hours, it went viral, but not in the way they expected. Some people were horrified by what they found. A teacher discovered her retirement fund had profited from the massacre and immediately divested. A bank found their name in the database and released a statement condemning Zenith. Insurance companies began quietly dropping coverage for similar operations, but others doubled down. Shareholders defended their investments. Executives claimed they were being persecuted. A whole media ecosystem emerged, arguing that the database was an invasion of privacy, that people had a right to invest without being harassed, that capitalism itself was under attack. The real shift came from an unexpected direction. A group of Zenith soldiers, including Marcus Chen, found their names and faces in the database. Unlike the executives who could hide behind corporate walls, the soldiers lived in regular neighborhoods. Their neighbors saw the database. Their families saw it. Their children's teachers saw it. Chun's daughter came home from school, crying because other students called her father a murderer. His wife filed for divorce. His parents stopped taking his calls. Everywhere he went, people recognized his face from the database and the original broadcast. Some called him names. Others just stared. A few treated him with careful, frightened politeness, like he was a bomb that might explode, unable to be anonymous anymore, unable to just do his job and collect his paycheck in peace. Chun did something unexpected. He reached out to Kelth directly. They met in a public park, surrounded by Sarah's group for security. Chun looked smaller than he had in his armor, younger, more vulnerable. But his eyes still held that same emptiness. "I don't know why I came," he said. "Maybe to explain. Maybe to apologize. Maybe because I have nowhere else to go." Kelf studied him. "Can you apologize for something you don't regret?" "I do regret it," Chun said quickly. Then hesitated. "No, that's not true. I regret the consequences. I regret that my daughter hates me. I regret losing my wife. But the action itself?" He shook his head. "I still don't feel anything about it. I remember pulling the trigger. I remember your people falling. I know that should mean something. But when I recall it, it's just facts. Data. No emotion attached. Then why are you here?" Kelf asked. Chun looked at his hands. "Because I thought if I saw you, talked to you, maybe I'd feel something. Maybe the machine would break and I'd suddenly understand what I'd done." He met her eyes. "But I still feel nothing. And that terrifies me more than anything that's happened." "You've become the system's perfect soldier," Sarah said softly. "Efficient, obedient, empty. There are others like me," Chung continued. "We're talking. Some want to run, find somewhere the database hasn't reached. Others want to sue you for defamation. But a few of us are starting to think that maybe we broke something inside ourselves that shouldn't be broken. Maybe we need to choose to feel, even if it doesn't come naturally anymore." He pulled out a data chip. "This has communications between our unit and command during the Vrelia operation. Orders, responses, coordination. More evidence for your database. Some of the other soldiers are contributing too. We figure if we're going to be exposed anyway, we might as well expose the whole chain of command with us." Kelf took the chip, her hands shaking with anger and something that might have been hope. "It won't bring back my people," she said. "No," Chen agreed. "But maybe it will save the next ones." The data Chen provided broke everything open. Not because it was shocking, but because it was mundane. Order after order, delivered in calm professional language. Casualty estimates discussed like weather forecasts. Civilian deaths categorized as acceptable losses and efficiency adjustments. The language of genocide rendered as corporate speak. More soldiers came forward after Chun. Not many. Perhaps 24 out of thousands. But each brought records, communications, evidence. They came to Sarah's safe house at odd hours. Faces hidden, voices shaking. Some cried. Others stared at nothing. A few still insisted they had done nothing wrong, that they were just following orders. But they handed over their data anyway. One soldier brought footage from his helmet camera. Kelth watched it once and then never again. She did not need to see her people's final moments rendered in high-definition tactical display overlays. But she kept the file. Evidence mattered now more than emotion. The database expanded. New names appeared daily as Sarah's network traced financial connections. A food supplier who provided rations to Zenith soldiers. A weapons manufacturer who sold ammunition at a premium. A logistics company that transported equipment. Each transaction was legal. Each individual decision was defensible. Together, they formed a machine that had consumed her world. The Galactic Council finally took notice. Not because of moral outrage, but because the situation had become diplomatically embarrassing. Member species were questioning Earth's fitness for continued Council participation. Trade agreements were being reconsidered. The humans' genocide had become economically inconvenient for other humans. The Council called for hearings. Kelth testified for 6 hours, walking them through the database, showing them how the machine worked. The Council members listened with the same polite disinterest they had shown before, but this time, reporters from dozens of species were present. This time, the galaxy was watching. The humans claimed this was a legal operation. Council member Throven said, reading from prepared notes. They purchase mineral rights through established channels. How do you respond? They purchase the right to extract minerals, Kelth replied. Not the right to murder a civilization. If legality is your only concern, then the law itself is broken. Throven looked uncomfortable. Behind him, his aide whispered urgently. The Council was used to processing complaints about trade disputes and border disagreements, not genocide. They had no framework for this, no procedures. So they did what bureaucracies do when confronted with the unthinkable. They formed a committee to study the issue. But while the Council stalled, the economic pressure mounted. Insurance companies publicly announced they would no longer cover military operations by resource extraction corporations. 3 major banks closed Zenith's lines of credit, citing reputational risk. The human government, finally feeling pressure, announced an investigation into the colonial governor who had sold the mineral rights. Zenith's stock price plummeted. Shareholders who had celebrated 3.7% profit growth now watched their investments collapse. Some held on, insisting the company was being unfairly persecuted. Others sold in panic. The quarterly earnings call was a disaster, with the CEO spending 40 minutes defending decisions that could not be defended. 2 months after the database launch, Zenith Collective announced it was suspending all expansion operations pending a comprehensive review of protocols. The 12 worlds that had been targeted for operations were granted temporary reprieve. Not because humanity had grown a conscience, but because genocide had become bad for business. Kelth should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt exhausted. She sat in the apartment she shared with her 12 refugees and watched human news networks analyze the Zenith collapse. They treated it like a fascinating case study in corporate mismanagement. One financial analyst noted that Zenith's mistake had been poor public relations rather than mass murder. "We did not win," she told Sarah one evening. "We just made it more expensive to kill us." Sarah could not argue. They both knew that 3 other corporations were already developing ethical extraction protocols to replace Zenith's operations. The machine was adapting, learning from Zenith's mistakes. Next time, the genocide would be better managed. The optics would be cleaner, the paper trail harder to trace. "But we broke something," Sarah insisted. "The illusion that ordinary people can participate in atrocity without consequences. Some of those shareholders will think twice before investing." Some of those soldiers will refuse orders. It's not enough, but it's something, is it? Calf asked. Your Senator Harrison is still in office. The executives who approved the bombardment are facing fines, not prison. Most of the soldiers returned to active duty after brief suspensions. The people who made money from my world's destruction gotta keep that money. Where are the consequences? Sarah had no answer. Because there was no answer. The machine was too big, too distributed, too embedded in human civilization to simply dismantle. You could expose it, damage it, force it to adapt. But breaking it entirely might require breaking human society itself. The Galactic Council announced its findings 6 months after the hearings. They condemned Zenith Collective's actions in the strongest possible terms. They passed a resolution requiring more oversight of resource extraction operations. They created a new committee to monitor corporate activities in contested regions. Then they moved on to other business. Calf was invited to speak at the resolution signing. She stood before the council chambers one final time, looking at the same faces that had dismissed her warnings so long ago. This time, they listened. This time, they clapped politely when she finished. This time, they had strong language and bureaucratic procedures. But still no justice. Still no accountability that matched the crime. I came here believing the galaxy had laws that protected civilizations like mine, Calf said, deviating from her prepared remarks. I learned that the galaxy has laws that protect property rights and corporate profits. I learned that my people's lives were worth less than the minerals beneath our cities. I learned that humans, the species famous for their passion and compassion, had built systems specifically designed to let them profit from suffering without feeling responsible. She paused, looking directly at the human delegation. But I also learned that some humans were willing to sacrifice everything to expose that system. That some humans chose to feel when feeling was inconvenient. That some humans remembered how to be human even after the machine tried to make them into something else. She thought of Sarah, who had given up wealth and security. Of Chun, who brought evidence even though he still felt nothing, choosing to do right even without emotional motivation. Of the activists who kept protesting even when attention faded. Of the shareholders who divested at financial loss. Of the journalists who kept investigating when it stopped being popular. So here is what terrifies me most about humans, Calf concluded. Not their capacity for cruelty, which is vast. Not their ability to industrialize indifference, which is remarkable. What terrifies me is that they possess the solution to every problem they create, and they so rarely choose to use it. They can build systems that amplify compassion as easily as they build systems that suppress it. They can choose to feel, to care, to sacrifice, to change. But mostly, they choose not to. The council chambers were silent. Calf gathered her notes and walked out. Behind her, the representatives of 100 species sat with their thoughts. Some uncomfortable, some thoughtful, most simply waiting for the session to end so they could move on to more pleasant business. Calf returned to Earth one final time. The Galactic Council had granted the Vrian refugees asylum and enough financial support to establish a small colony on a protected world. It was not home. It would never be home. But it was somewhere they could rebuild. Before leaving, she met with Sarah's group one last time. They gathered in the same safe house where they had planned their data offensive, but the energy was different now. Not defeated, exactly, but aware that they had won a battle, not a war. 3 new corporations have announced resource extraction operations, David reported. They're all emphasizing ethical procedures and community engagement. But the underlying model is the same. The Council's Oversight Committee is understaffed and underfunded, Priya added. It will take them years to investigate even a single operation thoroughly. And Zenith is restructuring under a new name, Martinez said. Same executives, same shareholders. Just better PR. Kelf nodded. She had expected nothing less. So the machine continues. The machine continues, Sarah agreed. But it's been damaged. People know now how it works. They can't claim ignorance anymore. Some will still participate, but others will resist. We built a template for how to fight back. That's something. Is it enough? Kelf asked. No, Sarah said honestly. But it's what we have. They said their goodbyes. Kel hugged each of them. These humans who had proven that their species could be more than the sum of their worst systems. Then she boarded the shuttle with her 12 refugees and left Earth behind. As the planet shrank in the viewport, one of the younger Vrians asked, "Will they remember us? Or will we fade away like all the other uncomfortable truths they prefer to forget?" Kel thought about the database, still online, still growing as Sarah's network continued to add evidence. She thought about the soldiers who had come forward. She thought about the shareholders who had divested. She thought about the humans who had chosen to feel when feeling was inconvenient. Some will forget, she said finally, but some will remember. And maybe, eventually, enough will remember that the next civilization targeted by the machine will have humans standing beside them instead of operating it. It was not the answer the young Vrian wanted. It was not the answer Kelth wanted. But it was the only honest answer available. In orbit above Earth, human corporations continued their operations. Executives held meetings. Shareholders reviewed portfolios. Soldiers followed orders. The machine hummed along, efficient and terrible. But in the cracks of that machine, small resistances grew. Former insiders leaked documents. Soldiers refused certain orders. Activists maintained pressure. Journalists kept investigating. It was not enough to stop the machine, but it was enough to remind everyone that the machine was a choice, not an inevitability. Years later, when another species faced destruction by human corporate interests, they found the Vrian database. They found Sarah's network. They found the template for resistance.